Hi, this is DJ with Kale Realty, and thank you for watching and listening to this short presentation from our owner of Kale Realty, Nick Patterson. And Nick, very shortly, is going to talk about how he chooses investment properties, in particular, investment properties that generate monthly income. And as a broker, obviously there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for brokers to participate with their own investments, but also to be able to bring these ideas to their clients. And it's actually, we have here at Kale Realty just over 500 brokers now. It's really one of the most common questions we receive on the support team is, hey, I want to get into investing, or my clients are asking about it. Where should I start? What should I start looking for with respect to doing the math of how do I find properties? How do I make sure that they are going to generate income? And this short presentation is going to go through that in much detail. So first, Nick's going to do about a 10-minute, 15-minute presentation, and then I'm going to come in with some questions. So just before we get started, if you're not currently a Kale Realty broker and you are interested in learning more, you can always visit us at joinkale.com. We pay out almost 100% on all commissions. What we do is just take a flat fee of $325 from a broker's commission, and they get every other penny. And we have a $49 monthly fee, as well as an annual errors and omissions fee of $199. Anyway, so if you're interested, feel free to always be able to visit joinkale.com or reach out to me. My name's DJ. Be happy to speak to you. So welcome to the presentation, and I'll turn it over to Nick.
Hello, I'm Nick Patterson, and I've been asked many times to describe how I buy multifamily homes. So me and DJ at the office decided to make a nice little webinar. This might take maybe 5 or 6 minutes to describe how I go about analyzing and putting offers and figure out what is a good property to buy. So I titled it One Realtor's Guide to Buying Multifamily by me, Nick Patterson of Kale Realty. So let's get started. So basically, I'll start with the facts. What I'm about to tell you is not hard, but what it does, it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of dedication, i.e. 2-3 hours a day putting in offers, researching deals, looking at neighborhoods. I have done this, so I'm speaking from experience, and I can also recommend books, which is basically how I learned it. So just ask me. Our contact information will be at the end of this video. Real estate is wonderful. You can trade expertise and hard work for equity. That's why the deal I'll be talking about is basically how to buy a property with no money down. So realtors, like you are, should be thinking of a passive cash flow. That was a problem when I was in the business. One day you would have a closing, make $5,000, and then when is your next check coming in? When you own multifamily business, you have checks coming in once a month. So you're in the business, you also need to know what you sell. So in this webinar, like I said, I'm going to show you the extreme basic principles for pulling off a deal with no money down. This is just one way out of millions of ways to do it. So take that as a grain of salt, I guess. So there's many ways to skin a cat, like I talked about. So here's my basic way how I analyze a relatively turnkey deal. When I say turnkey, I mean a property that is in pristine condition or almost pristine condition, where you don't have to go in and do a lot of rehab work. Buying a building is a lot like buying a business. You have your income and expenses. The most important factor is cash flow. The simple question that you ask yourself is my income greater than my expenses? Don't make it any more complex than that. So here is my current rule. My old rule used to be $200 a month per door, but that was with money down. This is my current rule with no money down, and that's $100 per month in cash flow after all my expenses, with 100% financing. What that means, I will go into in further detail as we get along in our webinar. So here's our scenario. I failed math in college. I really didn't fail math, I never took math, but I was a communications major. So when I analyze a deal or a building, I keep it as simple as possible. So here's our subject property. It's on the MLS right now. You can look it up. It's 3257 South Aberdeen. Those are the MLS numbers. And here's a picture of the property I took from Google Street View. It's a 6 flat in Bridgeport, listed at $595 with a rental income of $4,375. So all 6 units, that's what they're paying gross per month. I picked Bridgeport because that's my favorite location. So first we got to figure out our expenses. And here's a simple formula how I figure out my expenses. is they're 35% of my gross income, and that is not including taxes. So this comes from my own experience and will vary from building to building, but that's the foundation I found out. There's also the 50% rule, which is basically your expenses are 50% of your gross income. But I like to use the 35% and then add taxes on later, because in Chicago, especially Cook County or DuPage, taxes can really vary from building to building. So, common expenses are your gas, your electric, property management, insurance, cleaning, repairs, maintenance, reserves, dumpsters, capital expenditures, etc. So let's go through this quickly. So $43.75 times 12 means you make $52,500 a month gross. 35% of that is $18,375, and your taxes are $5,730. So your total estimated expenses for running this property are $24,105. More expenses than cap rate. So your total expenses are $24,105. Your net revenue is basically your gross income minus your expenses, and $28,395 is what you would make every single year if you had no mortgage. So here's your cap rate. Your cap basically means your yield on your return. When you hear people talking about a 10 cap, it means you'll get your money back in 10 years. Once again, remember, cap rates are all cash. They don't take into financing or P&I, which is the same thing. The formula for a cap rate is your net revenue divided by the purchase price. So our net revenue is $28,375 divided by the purchase price of $575, which comes out to 4.7 cap. That is actually terrible. So if I wanted to buy this property at a 10 cap, I simply take the net revenue of $28,395 and add a zero. So the 10 cap price is $283,950. Quite different than the asking price. So back to my rule. $100 a month cash flow per door at 100% financing. So we know that our income is $4,735 per month. I need my expenses to be down to $3,775 a month in order to make my $600K, or $600 per month. How do I do this? I use math. So you should all know what this is. If you click on the purchase price on the MLS, a mortgage calculator will pop up. So I basically just play around with the purchase price, and I figured here I put in the purchase price at $275. Obviously zero down payment. Interest rates are on 4.5. Everything's over 20 years when you do a commercial loan. And then I just put in our other under $24,105 as our expenses, which we figured out. And obviously zero for PMI. Boom! This is the price I need to buy it to make my rule, $275,000. Or basically a 10 cap. So here are some things to remember. Always do the calculations on making $100 per door per month from day one after the closing. Every realtor will tell you, or broker, that the rents are low and they should raise the rents. And the pro forma will show you this. But you see, just going over the math, if the rents were raised by just $50 per unit, how much that would help in the value of the property and how much more we would have paid. Also, I didn't review any remodeling costs. These numbers were just for a turnkey property. So sometimes you might have to go in and replace a kitchen or a bathroom. I didn't go over that. Last, just remember, pro forma basically means dreamland. If the seller could have just raised the rents, they should have done that prior to listing the property. So, thoughts on investors. So why do I say 100%, $100 per door at 100% financing? Because it opens you up to have investors help pay for the 25% down that banks require. Now you're taking advantage of your knowledge and putting a deal together and your hard work and getting it done. Now stick with me on this one. It might get a little confusing. But here's where the beauty of real estate comes in. So let's say you're able to get a signed contract at $275 for this property. You have a deal. I tell people all the time, money is easy in real estate investing. The deal is the hard part. It's not easy to get a $595,000 property under contract for $275,000. But let's say you do. Requires a down payment of $68,750. I'm including a 20% contingency for any repairs, carry costs, lost vacancy, rents, etc. So you need an investor to put down $82,500. Not too bad. Here's the ideal situation. Now you work out a deal with your investor. They always ask me, how do you find an investor? You ask. You ask your friends, you ask your family, you ask the guy sitting on the bus. There's always people willing to give money to someone that has a deal and is willing to do the work. So here's a common way that an investor would give you, $82,000. They would ask for maybe 50% equity in the property and maybe a 5% preferred return on his 82 grand. Not too terrible. So you being the hard worker, you close on the property, you make all the repairs, and you simply increase the rents to $1,000 per unit, or from $4,375 a month to $6,000 over the course of 12 months. Your expenses have not changed. They're still at $24,105. But your income is now $72,000 a year. Thus, your new net revenue has increased to $47,895. Wow. Now, once again, the beauty of real estate, the refinance. It's been 12 months. There's been some saturation. Your net cash flow has now increased to $47,895. You go back to your bank and you say, hey, Mr. Banker, look what I did. Now my property in 8 cap is now worth $598,687. And I only bought it for $275. The bank will put a new loan on the property at 80% loan to value of the new appraised value. Your old loan was $206,250. And you get a new loan for, let's say, $300,000, as you only needed to pay back your investor their $82,000 plus the 5% interest. Now remember here, don't get too greedy and pull out more than you need. That's where a lot of people get in trouble. So in an ideal world, remember, now both of you have a nice 6 flat with zero money in. Easier said than done, but that's pretty much the gist of it. Boom! Your new loan, $300,000, with a 4.5% interest rate over 20 years. Your expenses still at $24,105. Your total net is $3,906, and your total income is $6 grand. Your cash flow for this property is now $2,094. 50% for you, 50% for your investor, and you have no money in the deal. It's called infinite returns. Now, let's just do another one. So for further readings on this subject, Bigger Pockets, Bigger Pockets, Bigger Pockets, the podcast, the books, everything is in there, the forums, everything is amazing. Check it out. Here's some other recommendations. Multifamily Millions by Dave Lindahl, Millionaire Real Estate Investor, Every Rich Dad book by Robert Kiyosaki, The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. Search Ben Leibovich on Amazon. I took the $100 rule from him. I used to the $200 rule, but he had a great explanation on his $100 rule. And then finally is Carlton Sheets' program on eBay. It's a 12 CD series that you can purchase called No Money Down. Simply amazing. Well, I hope this was a good crash course in real estate investing with no money down for the benefit of realtors. Once again, my name is Nick, and if you have any questions, my contact information will be here. Thanks for listening.
Okay, I have some questions for you, Nick. You talked about putting in lots of offers. On average, and I know it depends on the type of property you're interested in, but how many offers have you found that you had to put in before you get a deal?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say for every 20 offers I put in, I might get 1 or 2 that come back and say yes. And the timeline is around a year. So there's a lot of times where a property would be listed at $800,000, I'd offer them $315,000, which fits the rule, and it would take about a year for them to come down to my price. So that 1 out of 20 that works takes a long time.
So to buy a property, it's about a year from start to finish.
Just on general, right? I mean, there might be some bank-owned properties that fit the rule right at the purchase price, straight from the MLS. That's interesting too. Like, a lot of people ask me where I find the deals. Out of my last 20 deals, 11 were found on the MLS. And then 3 were found on the MLS, but they were expired, and so I just contacted the owner. But generally, the question is, lots of offers, lots of properties, lots of time.
And are you actively seeking stuff that isn't on the MLS? And if so, how do you find those properties?
So we focus mainly on an 8-block radius around the Bridgeport area. And when we started, we focused on MLS, canceled listings, expired listings, LoopNet brokers, and then also we did neighborhood mailings, used circulars, for rents, signs, walking the blocks, talking to neighbors.
So you see a for rent sign, you might call the number and say, hey, are you the owner? Are you interested in selling? I might have an offer for you.
Exactly, yeah.
Cool.
I found that was a good way to use it.
But the vast majority of your properties have come from the MLS.
Over 60% straight from the MLS, yes.
Great. How many properties do you currently have?
We're just closing on our 20th building next month.
And then how often are you buying a new property?
So in 2005, we only bought 2 properties. 2006, we bought 1. 2017, we have 1 under contract. But 2012, 2013, we were able to pick up a vast majority of them in those years.
Now, do you work with one primary lender, or are you working with a lot of lenders? Is it hard to find financing when you have the cap rates pretty evident? What's been your experience?
My experience is we are using one lender now. We're currently branching out to more, but we use a community bank, and I like the community bank. That's a good question too, DJ, because I like the relationship with the community bank. I can call the individual there who's been there for 20 years. Everybody's been at that company for 10 plus years, and when you call, you talk to a decision maker. When I found you talk with the big banks, no one's a decision maker. Everyone has to see what they can do and talk to supervisors. So I like the customer service you get at the community banks. Much better.
You talked about it can often take a year or so to get the seller to come down to your price point, and you guys can proceed with the deal. How often do you ever use the cap rate as a negotiating tactic, like saying, hey, here's why I can't buy this property at this price, Mr. Seller, it doesn't make sense, or do you just wait for them to finally understand that it's not worth what they think it is?
It depends on who the seller is. So you try to present your offer based on their personality and based on their goals. A lot of the times I'm able to get these properties for a great deal is because the sellers own the property for 30, 40 years, and so they have nothing but equity in it.
Right.
And I like to keep it, like when I negotiate, I say, here's the price I'm going to give you. I usually don't talk about cap rates because I'm usually buying from, older individuals
who don't
understand. But what they do understand is my monthly cash flow. And I'll say, hey, if I buy at this price and I get this loan from the bank, I'm going to be losing $1,000 a month if I buy at your price.
Right.
And obviously they'll fight that. But if I'm just pleasant persistence with them and say, here's my price I'll offer you. And over time, a lot of them are retiring or moving down to Florida, Arizona, and they'll end up going with me because they exhausted all their other options.
Sure.
But when you deal with someone who's owned the property only for 2 or 3 years, they have a lot less equity in the property, so it's a lot harder to negotiate.
A lot more for them to lose.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
Rather than it's a win-win situation when I buy from an equity-rich seller.
Have you ever bought from someone and then they've wanted to stay on in some capacity as a percentage owner, or has it always been they're fully sold and out?
We had one individual ask that, and we said no.
Yeah.
When you go in, the most important thing in this business is to have your own rules and work by your rules. And having an extra equity partner it complicates things, and it's better just to not have the deal and move on to something else and be complicated with things like those.
One of the things you mentioned in the presentation was about raising rents, obviously, to increase the overall value of the property and also your monthly net income. How easy have you found it to be to raise the rents? In other words, obviously if you raise the rents 100%, you'll lose a tremendous number of people who are already there. But if you're raising it slightly or in a reasonable range, how easy do you get a lot of pushback from tenants on that? Do you lose a lot of tenants because of that?
So yeah, usually when we take over a building from an older owner, the rents are historically really low. And so when we'll come back with more market rents to their current tenant base, they usually leave. And so, which is okay, because they weren't going to, if they're only paying $500 a month, they're not going to somehow automatically start paying $950. And then, they usually leave, and we're able to remodel the apartments and get a new quality tenant in there for $950. And we found that the higher the rent is for the unit, the higher the quality of the tenant, and the higher the quality of the property. If we have a unupdated property that we're renting at $500 a month, it's going to be a lot harder to work with that client than someone who's willing to pay $950 for an updated unit.
And then how much time, if you are doing all of the work, if you're remodeling, obviously finding a new tenant, you're losing cash flow in that interim. Do you have goals around, hey, we don't want that unoccupied, even though we're doing work to it for a certain amount of time?
Oh, sure, you try to.
Obviously, want to minimize it.
You minimize, and that's why when we, like when I did my example of the down payment needed for that property, we had that 20% contingency fee in there. Well, it's not really a fee, a 20% contingency to hold, when the property is going to be vacant for
lost
a month.
rent.
Exactly. You're always going to want at least a 20% contingency on your ask for your investor.
Makes perfect sense.
Because stuff will happen.
Right, and then the one thing I think you didn't cover, and I know there's a million ways to do it, but as the investor, or the person doing the work will call you, because maybe the person putting the money in would call themselves the investor, but either way, you're the...
Yeah, it's a passive investor versus the...
Yes. Yeah. So as the passive investor, how do you pay, and I'm not asking you to reveal how you pay yourself on each deal, but how might you pay yourself on some of those, or would you not, and wait for the equity to appreciate to a point where you want to sell? I know there's a million ways to do it, but what are some...
So I guess I'd be the active investor, and the passive investor is the individual providing the money. So how I pay myself is, well, first, like on that, going back to the scenario where the investor gave us $82,000 with a 5% preferred return, he would have to have his $82,000 returned to him first before I started taking distributions. Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, it was a 12-month period. So in that ideal scenario, so it might take 16 months from the time we acquire the property to the time I start taking my first distribution check.
And would you take checks? Do you take checks normally monthly, or do you take them once a year? Obviously.
Yeah, every building is different, and that all depends on how you want to work with the investor. You could do it monthly, quarterly, every half a year. Everything is the great thing about real estate when you work with these investors is there's no rules. As long as you have everything in writing, as long as everything is transparent, the investor has access to the bank accounts. The investor has access to the tax returns. The investor has access to the spreadsheets. The investor has access to everything. So
they see what you're paid.
They see everything.
Sure.
And so the two of you will decide how you want to start taking distribution checks.
And then just one last thing about, you mentioned that your partners, and sometimes where there's a 50% equity stake, do you ever run into disagreements about it's time to sell, it's not time to sell? In other words, you're having a regular monthly, good net income. However, one of your partners is like, I want out.
That's a good question. That's why you take that. That's why you take your investors very seriously. Like I said, you're going to be maybe happy if someone's willing to give you the money, but you have to make sure their goals align with you.
Sure.
And so if your goal is to buy the property and flip it in 3 years, that's the goal. But if your goal is for buy and hold, everyone should be on the same page from the day one that the property is signed for under contract. So our investors that we use everyone knows that we're buy and hold for the long term. And so if they approached us with, hey, we need to sell the property, it's going to be a conversation because that's not part of that wasn't part of the original deal.
Oh, one last question. Have you? Is there any part of the 20% that you put into the to the price to the down payment for contingency repairs? Do you ever employ like an architecture surveyor or those surveys that are done just to make sure there isn't a $50,000 roof that needs to be repaired and redone in the next year that you might not have seen with your naked eye? Is there anything that you guys do prior to the deal closing to sort of confirm that sort of situation?
Yeah, there's always diligence that's included. But this scenario I went through was a turnkey property. Let's say something that's been rehabbed in the last 5 years.
Gotcha.
But now that you bring it up, we have had those issues where we purchased a property, and when we did we tore out some walls and tore out the flooring. There was, foundation issues, and joists need to be rebuilt. And that's a tough conversation because then you need to go back to your investor and say, guess what? We made a mistake. We need an extra, $15,000 for these repairs. Which, if he's getting the 5% preferred return and he still has that equity, they should be okay with, as long as you explain the scenario and what happens. So then you just have to hope that you did get the deal for a good enough price that when you're able to refinance it, you can still refinancing it, tacked on that extra $15K that you still owe back to your investor.
Great.
But yeah, the stuff does happen, so you can never be too careful.
But you don't, as a rule, hire one of those people to look at the property?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, of course. So we don't hire a home inspector. We have a contractor So we have a contractor come and look out at the property when it's during the due diligence period to make sure that everything is fits the mold. Electric, plumbing, and the big stuff.
Right, makes perfect sense. All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully this was helpful for everybody.